Is the Sharp X68000 the best machine on which to enjoy MIDI music within games? Hello cave dwellers, as if I needed any excuse to get this machine back out again, I've come up with one, and it's to explore the level of support and, to me, unexpected renditions of popular game tunes through MIDI devices on the system. MIDI devices such as these. Just look at that beautiful stack of music tech. The oldest in the pile being at the bottom, that's the Roland MT32, all the way back from 1987, and that would have set you back $695 on release. It's a well-known device in the PC retro gaming community, but it also offers official support from a range of games on the X68k, which was released in that same year, 1987. Next in the stack we have the Roland SC88VL. This was the slimmed down version of the SC88 and was released in 1996, so this is actually later than the life cycle of the X68K, which was discontinued in 93. However, you can set it into SC55 mode, which was an earlier model which was officially supported by the Sharp X68K. And it also has a CM64 mode, that was an offshoot of the MT32 below it, so it's all part and parcel of the same family tree of Roland products. Around $500 was the price tag for this model. And on the very top is the Yamaha MU80, which is not name checked anywhere on any Sharp games, but it does adhere to the general MIDI standard and should therefore play music just fine. This was the first device from Yamaha to support XG, or Yamaha Extended General MIDI, which added extra features such as 11 more drum kit sounds for devices that were XG aware, without breaking basic general MIDI compatibility. So in short, they should all work with the Sharp X68000, and it's going to be interesting to hear the differences on each of the devices. Does it come as a surprise that the Sharp games support these devices? Well, not really, when you consider that Yamaha and Roland are also from Japan and would have rubbed shoulders in the same stores as the computer, and the Sharp was a premium product. This wasn't a $100 games console, it was a workstation selling for over $2,000. So what's another $500 between friends at the store? Were these people completely mad, or did the experience justify the price tag? Let's find out, shall we? Starting with some upgrades to enable us to actually plug them in. Oh yeah, you're going to need to buy more stuff for that part too. Let's take a look. And before we continue with today's episode, I must say a big thank you to PCBWay.com, our sponsor. Whether you need 1 or 1,000 PCBs, they've got you covered. Bare boards with components on, whatever you need. And it's not just PCBs that they do. They also do 3D printing now and CNC work. So your electronics project can get a professional finish. Get the case, get the PCB, everything, all from one shop. PCBWay.com, we thank them for sponsoring today's episode. And now let's get on with the show. To get the most out of this demonstration, we have a couple of hurdles to overcome. One of which is that I've found that I'm actually unable to run some or quite a few of the games that are on here. Capcom games like Final Fight, which if I launch here you'll see well, it throws up an error message. An LHES error. LHES is the file browser software, so it's a non-specific error. It doesn't really tell us what's going on. Although the Japanese text above it might be more verbose. But this and Street Fighter 2, which we can see here, are both failing to launch, and I've ascertained that it's due to lack of memory. The other problem that we face is that there's no MIDI port on this thing, so we can't actually plug our MIDI devices in. Sure, you have a port for stereoscopic glasses as standard, but MIDI? No sir. So here's what we'll do. First up, I'll install this. It's a 4MB RAM upgrade. It's capable of holding 8 meg, but the onboard RAM and this will give us a total of 6 meg. We've got 2 meg on board, which is more than enough for anything that we want to try and run, or at least I hope it is, as that's a huge amount of RAM for the period. On MIDI duties we'll use this. This is a MIDI Ori, which is an FPGA based MIDI card. It has a Lattice FPGA chip which sits here on the board, which has about 1200 logic elements. To put that into context, the Cyclone 5 FPGA in the Mister, which many of you will be familiar with, has 110,000 logic elements, so it's way down on the chain in terms of capabilities, but it's perfectly capable for MIDI duties and no doubt a very low cost chip. It does, however, mean that the card looks rather unpopulated, but it does need to be full length to give us access to the port itself. So let's get these in the machine. If we take a look around the back, the Sharp has 2 I/O slots and we'll be filling them both up. I'm not sure what else I would put into these slots, to be honest. Perhaps if they offered a card-based MIDI synth to keep it all neat, that would be nice. But other than that, I really can't think of anything. I've taken off the blanking plates and I've cracked out my cutting-edge Nokia phone to shine a light in, and you can see that we have guide rails at the top and bottom, and they direct the upgrades right into the slot. And that's handy because they're a little bit stiff to get the cards into. You really need to give them a good push to get them in there. The guide rails giving you peace of mind that they are actually going in the slot as you apply quite a lot of pressure. That's the RAM card in there, and then the MIDI card goes in next. And again, that's quite a lot of force needed to snap that in, but eventually it goes in there. The RAM can be blanked off with an original blanking plate just to smarten it back up again, and the MIDI Ori was supplied with its own piano black blanking plate, which will give it a neat finish, give us access to the port. And those plastic flappy bits at the top and the bottom, those are levers which really help you to remove the card if you need to. You just push them against the case and the card pops back out. And with that, we can connect the cables up and we are ready to crank out some tunes. I spent the day checking out some games and there were over 800 titles released for this platform apparently, but I'll try and stick to some familiar titles so that it can really impress on us if it's doing a good job or not. Now internally, the Sharp uses the very same Yamaha YM sound chip as the CPS-1 arcade board, so it's very, very authentic. In fact, it's such a familiar game that any deviation from the original tunes are likely to be quite jarring. But let's give it a go. We'll use the SC first, and it sounds like this. It's also very familiar and yet so different at the same time. I really love the percussion on the SC. I even like that guitar. But is it better than the original? It's certainly not bad, so I think that's going to be quite subjective. And the music really does complement the sound effects nicely in game. To me, it feels like the music is much wider. I'm sure there's a musical term for that. Everything has a bit more space to resonate and reverberate around in my headphones. It's like a little live performance going on. Am I making any sense? I think what I'm saying is I really like it. Street Fighter 2 specifically supports the Roland sound canvas. The MT32 sounds good too if you plug it in, until you realise that it's actually missing the lead instrument. It's more of a backing track. And that's because the MT32 came out before General MIDI, so unless it's specifically supported in game, you'll get oddities like missing instruments. It's not bad though. If we switch over to the Yamaha now, we can get an idea of how that sounds, and it puts in a performance that the epic sax guy would be proud of, I think. We even get a little saxophone icon on the screen as it plays. So that gives us an idea of how these devices sound, and now I'd like to share with you a few more discoveries that I've made as I've just sat and played on the machine throughout the day. Some more familiar tunes and also some nice surprises along the way.
2, 1.
One thing I discovered about all of these devices, something that they have in common, is that they all make great organ sounds. One of my favourite discoveries in which we hear this was MIDI support in Ghouls and Ghosts. It would be so easy to stick to the internal sound chip and sound just like the arcade. Nobody would complain about that. But Capcom have gone the extra mile and included MIDI support, and it's not an afterthought. It really does take the game up a notch, I think, both on the SC and on the MU device, but the MU clinched it for me with this particular soundtrack. There's very little to choose between the SC and the MU, in all honesty. I think they're really quite closely matched. It really comes down to the difference between the characteristics of their instrument sets, which sound better to you, or to the particular soundtrack that you're listening to. Personally, I'd be happy to own either of these with the Sharp. There's that little in it. And onto a game now that I found had native support for the MT32, so we get to hear that in action now. It has more organ sounds, because this is Akumaju Dracula. Excuse my pronunciation there. It is also known as Castlevania Chronicles, but it would take 8 years after the Sharp to be released under that title on the Sony PlayStation. And this catchy track is the theme of Simon Belmondo, known in my parts, of course, as Simon Belmont. And despite being an older device, the MT32 really holds its own here. Honestly, I could listen to this soundtrack all day on the MT32, and if you head over to the second channel, I'm capturing these tracks in full, so you can hear more if you want to. Things took a turn for the more bizarre in our next game, Parodius, where I'm battling a pirate cat to an appropriate soundtrack, this time on the SC55. And then our fearless spaceship takes on a pirate penguin to a composition of Flight of the Bumblebee. And I think the MIDI music on this game actually sounds way better than the arcade version. For some games, MIDI wasn't enough, as I discovered in Spanner X, a bullet hell shooter with native MT32 support, and here's a track from it which you can hear which uses both MIDI and sound samples from the internal sound chip combined together. And if I just turn the MIDI music down on the mixer, you can hear those samples in isolation.
Ready? Going to dance. Going to dance. Going to dance.
I'm not entirely sure that they add a lot to the tune, but it's an interesting use of both audio methods at once. Hopefully you're starting to get the idea of what this machine is capable of. Even with 800 or so titles on the platform, not all of which support MIDI devices, it would be hard to say that it competes with PCs in terms of the quantity of MIDI music available in games. There was a period when MS-DOS setup programs, pretty much everyone that you came across for games, seemed to have support for MIDI devices, so the quantity really sits elsewhere, but the Sharp is well worth exploring for the quality of the tunes. Take Final Fight here, one of the most perfect home conversions of the arcade that you'll find anywhere, and Capcom have still seen fit to add native MT32 support to it, which sounds like this. The AAA titles have put as much effort into the MIDI tunes as they have every other part of the games, and they really benefit from it. Even the weird ones with Pirate Cats. And in some cases, like this Breakout clone, which I nearly skipped because, well, we've all played a lot of Breakout clones, I was hooked into keeping on playing because of how good the MIDI music sounded. It was literally a game changer for me. And of course, there are many games that don't support MIDI on the system, and some that, well, even if they could, I probably would struggle to accept it if they did. I mean, the earworm that is Bubble Bobble wouldn't sound right, would it? There's no MIDI support in this game, but you'll have that tune in your head for the rest of the day. Sorry, everyone. There is, of course, so much more to explore, but I hope today has been as insightful for you as it has been for me. Peering back through the letterbox of time into an affluent Japanese household which had thousands to throw at gaming, and, as these examples have shown, were largely rewarded for their money with some wonderful music. But they would probably also want some nice big speakers, and a sound system stacked high next to it, and a comfy chair, and where does it all stop? Meanwhile, back in the UK, when this thing was launched, I was playing my arcade ports on an 8-bit micro, the Amstrad CPC, which, such is the way that MIDI works, would have been perfectly capable of driving the music boxes we've heard today. The graphics, on the other hand, well, it's about the music today. Let's not bash my poor old Amstrad. There's very little that could hold a candle to the quality of the Sharp X68k in its prime, and MIDI just makes it shine that much brighter. I'll see you over on the second channel for extra captures and other bits from today's videos. Links are all in the description, and as always, take care and see you next time.